So, Jared, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. As I was saying off screen there, I'm really excited to have you on and learn more about the MVAC and a bit more about your life story as well. I know from military service, CEO of a company, podcast, you seem like a very well varied guy. And I always like speaking to people like that, or they tend to be interesting people anyway. But just for all the listeners that maybe don't know you or what the MVAC is, but even just if you want to give an intro first.
Oh, absolutely. It's an honor to be on, and I appreciate the invite, man. It's fun talking to people all the way across the world. It's amazing what technology can give us nowadays. So, Jared Bradley. I've been the CEO or president of MVAC Systems for, I'm losing track of the years now. It's like 15, 16 years now. I've worked with him almost 20. My dad brought me on back in 2006. So some of your listeners might not even be that old. So that's crazy. But I've really enjoyed the ride. So in MVAC terms, we initially launched the system in the food industry, and because it collects E. coli and salmonella, and that's my dad who invented the MVAC had a background in microbiology. And so there was a big E. coli outbreak in one of the hamburger chains here in the United States back in 1993. And that really kind of inspired the invention of the MVAC. And then we discovered around 2010 how well it worked potentially in forensics. And then in 2012 is when we pivoted into forensics. And that's where we've been ever since. And so now we've helped solve, thousands of cases all over the world. Highest concentration, obviously, is here in the United States. This is a fun fact. As far as your true crime followers, if they love older, like cold cases, we set a new record last week. We found out that we helped solve a 61-year-old cold case. So
Whoa.
I think it was back in 1964 out of Albany, New York. Absolutely crazy.
How did you help solve it? Like, what was the breaking point?
Well, it's a really interesting case. A lady, I've forgotten her name right now, of course, but you got me all starstruck, Gary. I can't think right. Anyway, in Albany, New York, there was a lady. She was 50 years old. And she was, I think, renting out part of her house as kind of as an apartment. And she was actually on the phone with her sister, and her doorbell rang, and she said, "Hey, I'm showing my apartment, so I need to go." And unfortunately, the guy that showed up was the guy that killed her, and he murdered her. And underneath her body was a handkerchief that had some of her blood on it, but they were able to, again, 60 years later, they were able to MVAC that handkerchief and get some of his DNA. And then they loaded the profile that they got up into CODIS, but the problem was there wasn't a match. And so a number of years later, and this, I think just last year, so I think the MVAC was done around 2015.
Right.
And then just last year, they sent the handkerchief out for what's called SMP testing, which is a different type of DNA. And they got his genealogical profile, or at least his family, and they were able to narrow it down. And then from there, once they narrowed it down to the family and figured out that it was most likely this certain guy, Nowalski, I think was his last name, they exhumed his body and got his DNA like out of some of his bone marrow. And then they were able to match that with not only the SMP profile, but also the STR profile, which is what the MVAC produces. So, A pretty cool
That's
case that,
fascinating. Like it's
yeah,
fascinating that like 61 years, like cold case, and like you mightn't have this information, but had that guy, had the perpetrator, had he like a prior record? Had he spent his life in jail, or do we just know he got away scot free and maybe didn't commit another crime? Or
yeah. My understanding is he was kind of like a serial killer,
oh,
which amazingly, you hear about a lot of these guys, the Golden State Killer and these serial killers that Ted Bundy, people like that. I don't know. Over there in Ireland, do you guys have any of these serial killer types? You guys are just all clean and no crime at all is committed over there, right?
yeah, I wouldn't say that, no crime, but I think, do you know what it is? I find it's a population thing sometimes. Like, so Ireland, again, small population, 5 million. Uh, we're fairly sure there's this thing in Ireland called a missing triangle, which is like centres between Dublin and like a lot of Midlands counties where a lot of women went missing in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's one
Yeah,
guy, yeah, I won't say his name, but they call him the Beast of Bolton Glass. And he was caught in a woods with a woman, like strangling her. I think he'd raped her and then strangling her. He went to jail for that, but they reckon he'd done a lot more.
mm-hmm.
But never convicted for them, only for the rape and this kind of abduction of this poor woman. But no one strikes out. The only other one is, I know our national broadcaster, I think, or it was some podcast aired about this man who'd moved to London. He was kind of like a drunk that seemingly had killed a lot of people. And he was from Dublin, from like the tenement blocks in Dublin. But yeah, no, serial killing is very rare over here. Like murder, typically rare enough in Ireland. I think
Yeah.
we might have 100 cases a year or less.
Well, that's a good thing. Certainly,
Yeah.
it's in the '60s, '70s, and even some of the '80s. A lot of these guys, the real psychopaths that, and they always start slow. I think there's torturing animals and things like that.
Yeah.
When they're teenagers, and that's kind of just one of the indicators of that there's major problems. But then the abuse, playground fights, those kind of things, and then it just gradually escalates. I know the Golden State Killer. He used to just break into people's houses and just got his excitement off of just rummaging through people's homes and rearranging things, and then he'd hide in the woods and watch and just do really weird things. But then eventually the thrill kind of wasn't there anymore, and so he escalated to actually assaulting people, robbing people, and then eventually started raping, especially the women. But once he kind of escalated into actually murdering them, some of the crazy things that he would do, especially the psychological torture, is really what he got the most excited about. And he'd make his like the husband, he would make the husband kneel down and place plates on top of him. And he said, if you move, I'm going to murder your whole family. And then he'd take the wife into the other room and rape her, or he'd sometimes even rape her on the bed right next to him. But he couldn't move because he had all these plates stacked, or pots and pans stacked on top of his back. So if he moved at all, they'd go crashing down. And it's
so incredibly psychopathic. Like 'cause that is like, if you were to describe like a psychopathic behavior, like or sadist, actually, maybe more sadistic, but that is grim behavior. And what's wild about that guy is he was a cop for part of it. Like when he was doing some of I don't think he'd graduated to murder at this stage, but he was a cop during the early break-in days.
Yeah, he was. How he passed the psyche val, I don't know, but once they're that deep, because he was in the military too, and
was
so
he
had
as well?
a little bit of I'm pretty sure he was in the Air Force for a little while, and then he was a cop, and a lot of the crimes he committed was while he was a cop. So during the day he would stake out some of the places that he wanted to hit, and then at night he'd go in there early in the morning. I actually interviewed on my podcast one of the victims. I think she was the fifth victim of the Golden State Killer, and she's Jane Carson is her name, and super neat lady. But yeah, it was like 6 a.m. I think, and her husband had just left, and then yeah, the Golden State Killer guy goes in and did his thing, but he fortunately he raped her, but he didn't kill her, and so she was able to survive and actually tell her story. But that was, he was earlier in his evolution. But anyway, the whole reason I brought all that up is in today's day, and today's, especially if it's an agency that's big enough that they have experienced detectives and crime scene people and technologies. I just don't see how a lot of these people can get away with the things that they used to.
Yeah.
Like the Golden State Killer with DNA and fingerprinting and the way that they can get fingerprints off of much more porous and rough items now, but especially DNA. You just can't get away with stuff like that like they used to.
But you think, but then, we have a massive case going on in Ireland at the minute, which is the Michael Gain case, which is like a farmer from west of Ireland, and so he goes missing. His wife reports him missing. This is back in March, but by the time it comes to May, he's like someone was out putting slurry in the fields, and pretty much he'd been chopped up and put into the slurry tank. And he sort of found bits of him spread across the field. And there was a guy, he's actually an American guy, that cheated, the kind of main suspect. He was I think he was like a former Marine or that, but he was kind of floating around Ireland as a vagrant. And Michael Gainey, took him into and gave him he had an old cottage on his land. Now this guy was cleared. He was cleared, the police investigated and all, but that's still unsolved. And the thing is, Jared, who goes to that level of brutality where you're going to chop someone up? And see me, they found blood on the chainsaw. He was I think he was, massacred with a chainsaw. Whether that was pre or post mortem, we don't know. But it just seems like a wild, no clear motive. And it's how in this day and age can someone get away with that? It's because I fall into the trap of thinking there could never be a serial killer. And again, thankfully, I think, technology has caught up so much, which makes it difficult for them. And the likes of the NVAC, or the MVAC, and forensics, genealogy and all this, but still people, get away with stuff. And it's mind-boggling, really.
Well, the biggest difference between, something like that is the chance that he'd be able to do that again is pretty low. Whoever killed that poor farmer, that's crazy.
And Jared, to go in then, to maybe bring us through a kind of more deep dive into how the actual MVAC works. So, how is it able to, or I suppose, how does it improve on the traditional DNA methods?
Well, a traditional method, there's multiple methods. So if you, especially on clothing, if there's take a blood spot, tiny little spot on your shirt, for example. Yeah. They could cut that entire thing out, and then they can actually put that little piece of cloth, say a 1 by 1 centimeter piece of cloth in the extraction tubes, and then the extraction tube, they add a liquid, and then it breaks the cell apart, and then it frees up the DNA, and then they can isolate the DNA and move on. So that's one of the tradition methods. Probably the most common traditional method, is in air quotes, of course, but is swabbing, and it's basically kind of a Q-tip. You would take this swab and rub it over the area of interest, and you have to think of if there's a visible stain, like a blood spatter, saliva that fluoresces under the different types of light. If it's visible to the naked eye, then these other traditional methods typically work just fine. And the more porous the surface, or the more non-porous the surface, like a tabletop, a window, something like that, where there's really nowhere for the DNA to go. It doesn't seep into the cracks and crevices because there really are none. Then you get a lot better recoveries even using these traditional methods. Where the MVAC comes into play is when you have just minute amounts of DNA. And when I describe the MVAC, you got to think of everybody knows how to operate a carpet cleaner. So if you think about the handheld portion of a carpet cleaner you would use to clean your couch or your stairs or something like that, where it's got the little handheld device, but it still sprays the liquid down onto the surface and vacuums at the same time. And so that's literally the way the MVAC works. So you just think of a medical grade carpet cleaner, to kind of give a visual to your listeners. And so that's the MVAC, when you apply it onto whatever surface it's on, the liquid, first of all, it penetrates the surface, and then the vacuum pressure is applied, and I wish I had one with me, but the sampling head itself, it sprays in the middle and then vacuums. It vacuums all the way around the spray, and so it's all contained, but it creates a lot of turbulence down there, almost like a mini hurricane. And so if you think about if DNA, take a saliva stain, somebody spits on the victim's clothing, as they're yelling at them or something like that, then that, or even touch them, so, and a lot of, oh yeah, touch DNAs, the MVAC's used all the time. So, if you imagine somebody being stabbed, I know over there, especially in the UK, there's a lot of stabbings. And in order to stab somebody multiple times, especially with a lot of blood, that knife gets really slick. And so you got to hold on to it a lot tighter, but you also typically have to grab a hold of the victim. And so if I'm right-handed and I'm stabbing you in the stomach or the chest, I'm going to grab your right shoulder, somewhere right around there, and in order to hold on to you. Well, if you use the MVAC on that shoulder, you don't have to be as precise as you do with the traditional methods because you can cover a larger surface area. But equally important is the MVAC will get deeper. The liquid will penetrate down into the fibers and get whatever kind of DNA is ground into those fibers that the swabbing or even the cutting won't be able to actually pull, because it just can't cover the surface area you need to, or it can't get as deep as it needs to. And so that's, I hope that makes sense, but that's kind of the way the MVAC works. And when you really need to collect whatever is there, again, if you can visibly see it, there's so much DNA there, it doesn't really matter what method you use. But if it's like, say, if the investigator, because touch DNA you can't see.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
If the investigator isn't exactly sure, exactly where the suspect might have grabbed you, then you want to be able to cover that entire shoulder area, which, like with swabbing, you probably wouldn't be able to really do effectively.
And just say if, is there more secretion of DNA on the hand? Because I'm presuming it's a topical DNA, so the victim's DNA will be on their shoulder as well, and so you collecting that, scooping that out, but it's going to have maybe traces of the perpetrator's DNA also. Is that the way it works?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're if it's your your sweatshirt there, or your jacket that you're wearing, your DNA is going to be all over that. But the really good labs, and with all the technology that they have and the sensibilities that they have now, sensitivities, sorry, that they can discriminate between those two. So they'll get what's called a reference sample, and so they'll get your DNA some way, typically like with a buccal swab, they'll run that, a different Q-tip on the inside of your mouth is the typical way they do it. And then they have something to compare it to. And so you have DNA from the evidence, which would be your jacket, and then the reference sample, the DNA they got from your cheek, and they'll be able to pair those up and kind of show which, mirror it out. And so the victim DNA, they can eliminate that. And so all of the little alleles, and when I say allele, what I mean by that is, so if you think of a heart monitor,
Yeah.
you got the little blips and things on the heart monitor. Imagine a whole page of those going along a continuum, and that's kind of what a DNA profile looks like. And so when I have one of those from you and one of those from the evidence, and I pair those up, and I put them on top of each other, then you can eliminate what the victim DNA, hopefully, and then whatever's left is hopefully the suspect DNA. So that at least gives you somewhere to go on. And that's when you have a relatively clean sample, meaning that there's not 20 people in there, then it's a lot easier to do. And I think up to about 4 or 5 people, they can discriminate that. And so but nowadays, back to our Golden State Killer and serial killer example, collecting DNA, you figure you only need about 10 cells worth of DNA to create a profile.
And it's not very small, like very minute.
Well, the average person sloughs off about 400,000 cells a day.
Oh,
so
10 is nothing.
Yeah, that's a lot. So out of that 400,000, if I'm grabbing you, if I grab your shoulder, what are the chances that at least 10 of those are going to be on your shoulder? It's pretty high. So if we have throughout the in viewing the crime scene and things, if we have a good idea of where that DNA is going to be deposited, and we use a tool that is going to be effective enough to collect it all, then we got them. So
and how, like, so with the 61-year-old case, cold case, like how long does the DNA last? Or maybe the question is how far can the MVAC go back? Like if it was a garment from 30 years ago and there was initially DNA on it, would it still be able to pick up the DNA that was on it? Or that is on it maybe, but it's just very degraded?
Well, DNA can last a long time. My understanding is they've found viable DNA in the pyramids. And so, that, but it has to be stored, it has to be collected properly, and it has to be stored properly. And so in the collection period, especially when you talk about cases like that are 61 years old, you're back in the 60s and 70s. DNA wasn't even on the scene until late 80s.
It's mad. So
and we've actually run into that problem where there was a case in Idaho where it was a really old case, and the MVAC got a great DNA profile, but there's also a picture of the detective holding up the article of clothing with his bare hands. And so, that DNA just, it couldn't use it in court because obviously the article of clothing had the detective's DNA on it. So but back in the 60s and 70s, nobody ever even thought about that. The only thing that was in the mind of the crime scene folks or the detectives was fingerprinting.
Yeah.
And so if it was on something that they didn't think they could get a fingerprint, then, and until later on, when fingerprinting technology started getting better and the detectives started getting smarter and saying, I don't want my fingerprints showing up on this evidence.
Yeah.
Then they started using gloves, and it's fortunate. And in this particular case out of Albany, it's really awesome that everything was collected and it was stored in a dry, cool place, which is what's required. So the more, temperature. The temperature has to be lowered, even frozen. If it's frozen, it'll last almost indefinitely.
Yeah.
But if it's in a really cool place, and it's also climate controlled, because humidity is the enemy. So
Ah.
humidity and heat, especially sunlight, because of the UV rays, that destroys the DNA.
Okay, and like I'm just thinking, like, is this? It sounds like such an incredible piece of technology. Like, was your dad a genius? Like, how did he? I know you said he had a background in was it biology or that, but like, how did he go from having his job to coming to the inception of this? I know it had a different purpose starting off, but how did he come about even creating the original maybe MVAC before it had a uh, uh, law enforcement or forensic arm to it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm kind of mad at him because he didn't give me much of the smarts that he had. Uh, so, but yeah, it was pretty ingenious. And so again, back in '93, when we had that E. coli outbreak, the whole cause of it was the beef. So the hamburger was tainted, and it had
Okay.
E. coli all through it. And so, which amazingly it's not an issue if you cook your hamburgers. If you cook the meat to 160 degrees or higher, then it kills all the bacteria. But back then, this hamburger chain would cook your hamburger to order, and clearly enough people had said, "Hey, I want a medium rare hamburger,"
Yeah.
which I think is nasty. I don't know
Yeah.
why anybody would do that. I mean, a medium rare
Steak is
steak,
different.
I'm all over that. But hamburger,
Yeah.
cook your hamburgers, folks. So my dad's background, he grew up in Idaho on a ranch,
Okay.
and in the course of the 40s and 50s, as he was a kid and working the family ranch, he also became a master welder, and so he could do and so he had this ability to kind of
He's
create things
engineering kind of
and
as well.
visualize how to weld up a good pen or something like that. And so uh, when this E. coli outbreak happened, uh, especially because they raised beef on their ranch, and so it really bothered him. He's like, "How in the world are we killing kids?" Because six children died from that E. coli outbreak, and there were about 140 people that went into permanent kidney failure. And
Oh,
so,
that's
they
nasty.
either need to get a kidney transplant or they'd be on dialysis the rest of their lives. And so just absolutely miserable. Anyway, my dad looked at that and he's like, something is really wrong. And so he was a scientist. And so he started thinking, well, how do I, if you got to first analyze and identify the problem. And so he recognized that in the whole chain of events where it goes from, a cow that's walking into a slaughterhouse, from that stage all the way to hamburger that's on your plate. Well, where did the breakdown happen? And he recognized that the upfront collection was really the weak link. And so he started thinking, well, if that's the weak link, if it's not collecting it, if it's just kind of bypassing where the E. coli is, and it can't get into the little nooks and crannies that's on like a beef carcass,
Yeah.
then how do you get more aggressive with it? Well, it's if you have a stain on your carpet, so that poses the problem. You have you spill some wine or something, red
Yeah.
wine on your gray carpet. That's an issue. So how do you get that up? You can try to soak it up with a towel. You can try to use a broom on it, but those really aren't going to be effective. It's not going to get deep into the fibers, and so clearly the carpet cleaner type of a tool is what's going to have to happen. So then once he recognized that, then he had to design the MVAC so that it could actually do the collection, but it wouldn't re-aerosolize it. It's like you can't really use a regular vacuum, because once you use it, then you'd have to throw the whole thing away. So how do you isolate it in a one-time use, a disposable type of a cartridge that, then you can mass produce it. And so that, there's all these issues that he came up with, and one by one just had to solve them. And ultimately he came up with the MVAC, and that's what we use today. And like I said, we launched it in 2007 in the food industry. And it, so we were going around to major beef plants and, spinach producers and all these other areas that they have problems. And we showed them how they could collect more contamination. And, ultimately though, we recognized that they just weren't going to use it. The level of
cost-wise, or
what's that?
Like for due to cost, or like due to it's trying to scale, maybe that, like that testing, it's too.
They really wouldn't ever tell us. So pick one. It's kind of they ultimately it just collected more than what they wanted to find, and then and what they were required to by the USDA, and the moral of that story is cook your food.
Yeah.
So that's
especially with the hamburger. That's wild when people are getting that medium rare, because I always heard like you should cook mince. It's not like a steak, really. I don't know, different bacteria when it's grounded or something, but that's definitely the moral of the story.
It's
so then and like maybe good to go back prior to this, because I'm intrigued. Like, prior then to 2006, like you served in like the military.
Yeah. Well, I served in the military, active duty, a little over 3 years, and then I was with the 101st Airborne Division, and had a bunch of fun with that, and I served in the reserves for an additional like 11 years. So I loved the military. It was a great shape, helped shape my life, and became an integral part of me. But once I got out of active duty, then I went into different sales jobs, and ultimately, before I came on with MVAC Systems, I was actually with some pharmaceutical companies, and I was. It's kind of a funny story. So my dad, growing up on a ranch, you can imagine how much complaining he enjoyed hearing, and so, of course, being his son, and I was trying to catch up with him, and I was on the phone with him, and I was this is back in 2000, I think it was probably the first part of 2006.
Yeah.
And I was like, Dad, I just don't see a lot of future in the pharmaceutical industry. I thought this was going to be, my career for the rest of my life, and it's just miserable. And anyway, whiny. And he was growing up on a ranch. He was just like, all right, Jared, shut up. And why don't you come work for me? This invention that I've been telling you guys about for the last, 6-7 years, we're ready to launch it. And so between the military, the sales, and being his son, I was a really good fit for what he needed. And so I was like, yeah, I'll jump. So September of 2006 is when I came on, and I've been here ever since.
That's it. So from the small startup, and like it's scaled out, but like these like, is the product sold in then to like law enforcement, or do law enforcement come to you and you run it? Is it a service more so, or a product you sell into different departments?
Oh, well, yeah, we typically sell the system to the different crime labs and departments, and I'll go. I've traveled all over the world, training people on how to use it.
Yeah, it's
once they actually purchase it, and so which is I just love it. It's so fun because you got to think of these, especially detectives. These guys are working on these cases, and just like it's frustrating for like the victims' families when they can't get answers, it's equally frustrating for the detectives because they
Yeah.
they want to solve the case too, and for obviously different reasons, but they're emotionally invested into these cases just like the victim's family is. I
Yeah.
mean, clearly from different angles, but to be able to train these guys and to show them how the MVAC can take it beyond where they're stuck.
Yeah.
If the detective has worked on this for years and every single time something new comes up, they're just like, oh yeah, this is awesome, and then they pursue it until they can't, and it turns out to be another dead end. That's just hugely frustrating for them. So to be able to bring in this new technology and be able to say, hey, this may be able to produce a DNA profile where you couldn't get it before, and
Yeah.
it's occurred literally thousands of times, and it's an amazing feeling when I get a phone call from one of these detectives that I've been working with for a little while, and they just say, you're not going to believe what just happened. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
And
a great
what's
feeling.
has like there been any really high profile? Like I know there's probably been thousands of cases like where you've helped. Has there been any like really high profile ones?
Yeah, well, there's I don't know if you guys over there in Ireland have heard of the West Memphis Three. It's a really famous case here in the United States that it was in West Memphis, Arkansas, just across the river from where Memphis, Tennessee is.
Yeah.
Most people know where that is. And this is back in the 90s. Yeah, these 3 8-year-old boys went missing, and then they found their bodies in a drainage ditch, and they'd been tied up in a particular way, and the detectives immediately, because of the circumstances of the case, thought that it was these 3 teenage boys that were kind of troublemakers, and so they honed right in on them and actually convicted them. They served 20 years in prison, and then, but over time, more and more information came out, and so they finally let those guys out. And it's about as high profile as like the John Benet Ramsey case, the O.J.
Yeah.
Simpson case. Those are some really big ones that are in the United States. And one of the teenagers that was convicted has kind of been the lead on this ever since they got out. I think they were released in like 2011, so 14, 15 years ago, and ever since then, he has been trying to get more testing done on the actual evidence. So the shoelaces of the 3 8-year-old boys that were murdered, and different clothing items and that kind of thing. And so the Arkansas Supreme Court has finally approved that, and they've specifically asked for MVAC testing
Oh.
because they figure that MVAC is the only tool that would be able to penetrate deep enough into the fibers of the little boys'
Yeah.
clothing to be able to collect any kind of DNA, because it was all submerged in this drainage ditch, so really dirty and nasty, and but they're hoping that they'll be able to find some DNA from that. And yeah, so if they
Because the
solve that
monster is
case,
still out there then. Like
yeah,
if the 3 teenagers were wrongly convicted,
well,
the
that's
monster
the
that
thing
did it are
is,
monsters.
there's been all sorts of documentaries and Netflix series, and it's a big case. And but one of two things is going to happen. It's the beautiful thing is kind of a sidebar, but the beautiful thing to me about forensics evidence, and it doesn't matter if it's fingerprinting or DNA or tire marks, whatever. It's objective, and it doesn't really have an opinion. It just kind of shows you what there is. And then the thing about, you can take that objective result, and then somehow it has to be placed in the either eliminated, or if there's an explanation, for example, of why my DNA would be on your jacket, then we were in a bar together, and you were sitting next to me as we were drinking. Well, that's an explanation of why my DNA might be on your jacket. But if you are there deceased and you're laying there, then that's a little harder to explain why my DNA would be there.
Yeah.
Especially if we don't know each other, that kind of thing. But DNA is just DNA. It just says yep, this person was in contact with this other person, and it's objective. And I love that, because it's just a part of the story that the detectives, putting that puzzle together, figuring out how it all fits together. And sometimes it doesn't fit at all, and so you can eliminate it. But if it does
that's
fit,
the beauty
then,
of it.
Yeah, then you
Like
really need to.
Because we know, like, human behavior, like, with all, it's so, people are flawed, like,
Yeah.
and you're gonna have, like, because the thing is, I'm just spiking on my head there now, is like, the MVAC is brilliant. It'll help solve cold cases, but the exoneration piece is huge as well. Like, you just get a bad maybe detective or someone that's just wants to close a case, and which it does happen, and some poor person goes down for 20 years for murder, or it could be life for murder. That just didn't do it. And it's just maybe the circumstantial, really good, prosecutor, and that person goes away. But the MVAC has that power then as well to exonerate people that have, spent years. Like that, they're tragic cases, man. Some of them people that end up 20 years in prison, and like sometimes they get exonerated, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, well, I was in Pennsylvania earlier this week, and at a conference there, and I met an attorney, and he's a defense attorney, and it's interesting that when he was 17, he was convicted of a murder and served like 16 years, I think, but he was innocent, and DNA actually helped exonerate him. And the amazing thing is, when he was in prison, he became a lawyer, and actually helped with his own exoneration as an attorney. So, but still, I think about, you think about, I don't know how old you are, probably 21, but anyway, I think back on those years between the ages of like 18 and 35. Those are some amazing years that when I look back on them. And but the thought that I would be sitting in prison in a little cell during that entire period of time, knowing full well that I was innocent, I can't think of anything worse. And so, if there's people that are wrongfully incarcerated, then I think it's an absolute obligation for everybody in society to help free them, because that's just not right.
No, it's not. Like, I can just imagine the sense of injustice, and then trying to just kind of bear through it, because you still have to get on with things. Like, just because you're in there wrongfully doesn't mean that everyone's going to be nice to you and stuff like that. Prison life, I can imagine, will just eat you up anyway. And never mind if you have this big chip on your shoulder. Some of them people probably just have to hunker down and get on with things. Which, if anything, I think maybe the only silver lining there is it might build that like resolve. Like that guy then that you just mentioned from Pennsylvania, obviously went on and achieved a lot with his life. Despite them circumstances, and maybe some of that resolve, to pass the bar and stuff like that comes from, some of that struggle in prison. It might have helped garner a certain fortitude that I think maybe people that don't have any struggle in their life fail to muster up.
Yeah, there's a pretty wide gap there. You see some people that They've never really had to work hard for anything in their life, and then you compare it to that the gentleman that I met that's an attorney, but he's missing 15 years of his life, and what a tragedy that those are some good years, in your 20s. It's like, geez, man, what are you doing? Are you? I love seeing young guys like you, where it's clear that you're trying to do something productive. You're doing something with your life, and I compare guys like you to some of those that are out there that they're in college for 8 years because they love to party, and they're just wasting away. And I'm like, those are the years that you should be spending you be the most focused on developing yourself and creating a man, especially men, but creating a man that once you hit your 30s, you just rocket ship out, because you've actually developed yourself to the point that you have value in society. And all these people nowadays, especially the criminals, they just, especially when they were younger, they just pissed everything away. It's like, you know what, you had the same exact chance, and the same amount of time that Gary had, but Gary's being successful, and you're, just being a petty thug. And
but I think it's almost like I don't want to say morality is the wrong word here, but the social mores maybe has shifted. Like if you go on social media now, like when I was growing up, like we looked up to people that were successful and did well, and people that got rich. Now online, it's like successful people are evil nearly, or rich people are evil, or someone that's striving. These aren't like things that like people see as achievements. It's almost something to tear down. Like if you look at the kind of toxic sludge on social media, I try to avoid it a lot now, but it's like all it is kind of complaining, like them attributes of, really striving to be successful are almost seen as, oh, you're greedy and stuff. There's this weird sleight of hand that's happened in terms of like what we as a society kind of hold in regard as productive and like something to strive for. It's like the underpinning of what held society together has been ripped out and replaced with this like thing of tear it down instead of trying to build it up. It's the most bizarre time.
The irony of it is everybody looks at rich people, that are authentically wealthy and successful, and they're like, oh, those people are evil, they, like you said. And yet 99% of them that are posting a lot of this content and stuff, they're always portraying themselves as being wealthy and successful. So it's kind of like, you know what? Even when they're not, it's amazing how many influencers have gotten caught renting renting a private, just the private, like they'll pay $500 to go take pictures in a private jet, but they never actually flown in one, or they get to take pictures with some bling and stuff, but they've never actually owned it. So they wanted the appearance of success so that they can post it on social media, but they've never actually done what they need to in order to actually be successful.
The hard work.
And hard work is a major part of it. And it's sad because a lot of those same people, they want to be influencers. They want to have the appearance of being wealthy, but when they can't have the true wealth, then they turn to crime.
Yeah.
And, turning to crime, especially like we said now, a little earlier, nowadays, it is rough. It is really hard to get away with things. Yeah. And, eventually it's going to catch up to you. And,
and like crime is as old, like it's such an old story. They go back to Cain and Abel. Like I know it's not crime, like crime, maybe we're talking from a law perspective, but like that thing of like Cain and Abel, it's like, one brother's successful, the other brother isn't. The other brother wants what the other brother has and goes kills him. Like, and
Yeah.
So like, I think that's always in us. I know that's a biblical story, but like if you go back even to cavemen or any, like there's always going to be someone that wants to take, what another person
Yeah.
has and not work for it. Like crime will never go away, but I think that this the silver lining and I think thing to be hopeful for is the propensity of people getting caught is going to be higher, and hopefully that'll bring down recidivism levels. Because
Mm-hmm.
if people are going to get caught far more often, it might pause them. But it's then where does it go? Because Jared, we know like that instinct. I think doesn't. It's not going to suddenly like wash out of the population or the gene pool. So what does it go into? Like, and this is maybe where the cybercrime is we see it, like the scams, the fraud is absolutely insane at the minute. Like if you follow any of these people getting scammed out of their crypto and these like scam centers in Southeast Asia and stuff like that, where they don't have to be violent, but like they'll still leave a trail if it's digital. But yeah, it's where does the criminal element, what form does it drift into? I know that's the kind of greed element, but then there is I think the naturally violent, the sadistic element, and it's where does that drift into? I think you mentioned it there, like, but the Michael Gain case in Ireland. If you had that guy, obviously, whoever the perpetrator was, committed extreme violence. But I think what you said was really interesting there. I hadn't heard that take on it before, that it's far likely he'll get away with it twice, which is really interesting. That you might get lucky once.
Yeah, you start looking at new technologies. The chance of getting away with something nowadays is so low, especially with a great example. Did you guys hear about in Moscow, Idaho, at the University of Idaho, there were 4 college students that were murdered.
Yeah.
They were stabbed to death. You guys heard about that case?
Yeah.
Yeah. The amazing thing is, my dad actually went to university. Most of the family on my dad's side, especially, went to University of Idaho, and so I actually lived in Moscow, Idaho, for 10 years while my dad was going to school there. So it was it was a big deal when these four students were murdered, and so I actually called the Moscow PD, and I said, "Hey, we have strong ties to University of Idaho. If you need MVAC testing, man, I'll load up a system. I'll be up there tomorrow." What we didn't realize is that they were already onto him, because they used the guy's cell phone and triangulated kind of where he was, and that this guy was, even though he was a University of a Washington State University, which is like 15, 20 miles away, he was over in that area all the time.
Yeah.
And so they were able to ping his phone, and they can triangulate you. But with all the technologies, there's the doorbell cameras, there's observation cameras all around the city. There's the ability to triangulate. If you hear a shot, there's technology that can triangulate exactly where that shot was. There's the chance of getting away with a crime like that in today's society is really low. So it's much better to just be productive, develop yourself, become of value to society, and then you can have everything you want if you just work hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Definitely. 100%. I like that. And I just want to apologize if anyone's on this on video. I didn't pull down the blinds, and the Irish sun, which is normally hidden at this time of the year, has made an appearance. So I look like I'm washed out and ghostly in this sort of pale light. But Jared, I want to bring it back because we've had a shared guest on, and that's Mike Gatto. And I found that was the most interesting case. When we're talking about unsolved, that was so puzzling for me.
Which case?
Mike Gatto. So he was a congressman in California.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and did you get to work the MVAC on that case, or no? Is it kind of maybe still in motion, or maybe you can't talk about ongoing cases? I'm not sure.
Not that I know of, but he did introduce us to introduced me to the detective that's over his father's case.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if we ever can, then we'll definitely, and yeah, we'll definitely help if we can. We always do. I didn't have a chance. I haven't heard any feedback on that yet, but
Yeah.
I'd be
Such a puzzling
surprised.
case.
Yeah, that's another one of those unsolved weird cases that trying to figure out the motive is just one of those. You're
Yeah.
like, why would this happen? There's all sorts of theories and that.
And there was just no like evidence in the system. That's the like it's I think if you're going like a murder, like someone murders someone and they're not already in the system, they haven't flagged in the system. Now I say that on bated breath. The last guest they had on, we were talking about it was an Irish case. Irene White was the woman's name. And she was stabbed 34 times in her home, and it was an unsolved case for a long time. But what happened is the husband's business partner, I think it was, had hired a hitman who was like working for them, that had a security for him. And he was like in a lot of debt with like, he was an addict on coke and stuff like that. And he did the murder, but like wasn't an assassin or a hitman or anything like that, but did this job just to get out of debt. And again, he'd never had a life of crime or anything like that. And then kind of gets caught. Just because he'd confessed to this girl in Australia, an Irish girl that had emigrated to Australia, and that kind of turned the investigation. But it's a strange one like that sometimes it can be weird. It's not always a criminal maybe that does these acts, or essentially a criminal, or that's had a life of crime. But the Mike Gatto one, like there's so many different holes in, like you kind of think, oh, could it be that? Could it be the paintings? Could it be, someone trying to get into the safe, this Eastern European hitman? But then it's like there's a hole in everything. It's just one of them ones where I'm like scratching my head, and I hate like an unsolved. You're trying to know like what happened, but that is a puzzler of one. So hopefully the MVAC can do something there anyway.
Yeah, that'd be amazing if they could use our technology and actually get some DNA off the clothing or something. It's most crimes are crimes of convenience. There's some guy goes into a home and is robbing the place just because he's a petty criminal and just wants to steal some jewelry or something to get his next hit. But then the mother or the wife will come home and it goes from a robbery to a rape kind of thing. Those something like that makes more sense because it's one of those crimes of opportunities. But when there's no motive, when there's no reason for something to happen, there's no connection between the crime and the person, that at least that anybody can figure out. Those are the ones that are really the like you said, the head scratchers, where you're kind of like, what would inspire somebody to injure this person when this person is such a good person? They're like, a priest or something like that. I'd be like, that guy never hurt anybody. He was always contributing to his community, always doing service, always helping his neighbor mow the lawn, and those kind of things. It's like, why would anybody want to injure and let alone kill that person? It's like, well, holy crap! Think about the Irina Slavinska case. I'm assuming you guys heard about that.
In the subway.
Yeah, the young girl that in Charlotte, North Carolina. Oh my gosh, that one. I'll tell you what, of all the cases that should send, especially the men, if that case and that scenario doesn't send you over the edge and want you to just absolutely destroy somebody, I don't know what case would, because that poor girl.
And just give, for some of the listeners that mightn't be familiar, Jared, just give even a quick blurb of it.
Well, this young girl, I think she was 23, from Ukraine, had immigrated to the United States because they of the Ukraine-Russia war, and was living there. She loved the United States. She was working like in a sandwich shop, and so which is amazing. It's crazy how many lazy people in the United States won't even take a job like that because it's beneath them or whatever. And yet this young girl was trying to make her way in and make a living by coming to the United States and escaping war. She was anyway, just young, beautiful girl. And after work, you could even see she's still in her work uniform, gets on a subway or gets on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the guy that is sitting behind her, just out of the blue, he was like 4 minutes after she had sat down in front of him, pulls out a pocket knife and just rears up and just stabs her in the throat multiple times. And within just like 2 minutes, she was dead. And but to me, I have daughters that are that age, and I think about my daughter going through something like that, and just not only the look of horror of this guy just attacked me, but then to me the worst part of it is when she realizes what the trouble she's in. She realizes she's dying, and I think the shock and the horror and the sadness on her face when that realization happened, as a dad and as a man, that gets to me. And I think the whole world was so shocked by that and outraged by that, in my opinion, that guy should get the death penalty. There's nothing short of that absolutely, and I,
and the video was so horrible because it's the look of absolute terror and dread and shock on her face when she realizes. And I think what almost annoyed me then is there was so many people around that just kind of stood by, like no one, like I like to think anyway, I fucking try and do something like that. There'd be some sort of like impulse in me that would try and protect that, but not just to walk away and kind of let it happen. And it's just so, man, it's just so tragic and sad, like that can happen. Like, and like mental, another band in, like, it was a lot of mental health and stuff, but like, I think I'd read he was let out of prison early or something like that. I don't know. There has to be.
Yeah. The guy had been arrested, for other crimes, and including major crimes like assault, something like 14 times. I mean, there's absolutely no reason for that guy to be walking out on the streets. There is just no way that he should have been sitting on that subway when she got on there. And that's another part that's really infuriating. And there's certain places, and I'm sure this is, well, I don't know if it's this bad in Ireland or anywhere else in Europe, especially, but in the United States, there's particular areas around the country where a lot of these judges have been nominated and they've gotten their positions from very progressive and liberal politicians, and they just have this weird outlook in life that they just think that certain people in society should never be punished, and you know what? I'm sorry. If you can't live in society and be a productive citizen, and worse, you're going to actually be violent and destructive to other citizens that are just trying to live their lives, then you shouldn't be in society. And you just,
But that's what prison is for. Like that's what the prison service is for. Like in Ireland, we have a very recidivist, or we have a very reformative approach which is literally tries to reform people. It's not a punishment really based system, but we have a judge exactly like in Ireland, which is, I think, is, as history bores out its verdict on the judge, that they will go down. They should be arrested for what they're allowing onto the streets. Like, I mean, like, pedophiles getting, like, allowed out on bail, pedophiles getting suspended sentence, like, it's just so infuriating. And again, it's too liberal with an approach to justice. Like, justice, like the criminal system, the prison system, has a very valuable impact on society, and it's to keep people safe, to take, like, the bad predators off the streets, so a woman can feel safe pretty much walking home. And when that fails, like, it's because it's a lot of the time it's going to hurt women more than men, essentially, which is just tragic. And it's just, and again, we all just stand by and kind of, I see people giving out and stuff like that, but nothing changes. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, you just have to understand at some junction that there are people that are not, they're not fixable.
Yeah,
and
psychopath kind of.
Yeah, especially
no
like
cure.
the people that I think are the worst in society are like child molesters.
Yeah.
Anybody that would injure a child in that way, to me, there's no fixing them. There's no changing them. I've seen so many that are, the recidivism rate is just absolutely staggering. And to me, someone that would rape a small child, you got one chance at that. I mean, if you do that kind of a crime, to me, you're done. You just, I don't care what happens to you. You've destroyed people, like, for generations.
Yeah.
And the level of evil that is associated with that, to me, is just, you just can't make up for that.
Yeah, like, one of the most pernicious things I've ever seen was trying to reclassify pretty much pedophiles as MAPs, minor attracted people, that it was like a sexual orientation. And, like, I mean, I just, it's the most exhausting thing ever, because what version of reality are people living in?
Nope.
There is no such thing as that. It is a predator. It is a predator.
I reject that with every amount of
Every
energy that I can
being.
muster. Yeah, screw that. I'm like, no way. You know what?
Yeah.
I don't care if you have that, but if you act on it, you're done. In my opinion. I mean, I would be a criminal's nightmare if I was a judge, because I would just say, I grew up in Idaho and worked on farms and ranches and bucking hay bales and and then my military service just kind of shaped me into the no nonsense kind of guy that I think I am now. And but I'm just like, no, sorry. You injure a child in that way, you're done.
Yeah, or attacking women, stuff like that. Like, I think, men will fight, and, like, I think there's, like, a bit more war between them and bellicose between them. But I think it's women and children, really, because they're, like, definitely with children, I think they're so vulnerable. So to have a predator, like, around that, it's unexcusable. And I think, like, the full force of the law should come down on them. It's the same with murder as well. But, like, to do that to a child or anything like that, you're kind of taking their life away. Like, a lot of them end up into substance abuse. They have serious post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of the time, what will happen in the psychological literature is what we see is, they can form, like, form psychosis. So you're essentially, you're not even, it's not that maybe that you're taking their life away, but you can, in some instances, sentence them to a life of just, kind of their own private hell, which is, you said it there a minute ago, it is evil. It's evil.
Yeah. No, I think the damage that you've done to not only that individual, that child, but also to society, actually, I mean, if you have to put a hierarchy on it, I think it's worse than actually incarcerating people wrongfully. That's as horrible as that thought is. I think child predators are worse because again, you've damaged that person, you've damaged the family, you've damaged the community around them because they know what happened to that poor little kid, and then that poor little kid is going to carry that damage all the way through adulthood, for generations. It's gonna affect people after that. So yeah, we need to get off that one because it'll get me all fired up.
It'll keep spiraling down. But yeah, like it's just, I suppose, even just here, because before we finish up and all, like, because you've had some, like, in your podcast going on a long time, you've had some incredible guests on. Like, was there any story, any case, any kind of interview or episode that just stands out as like that kind of shocked you or left you with like, kind of left a lasting memory, I suppose?
Wow. Yeah. I've had some pretty amazing guests on, and especially the not just victims, but also like Jane Carson was one of those. The one that was the fifth victim of the Golden State Killers. Her story was absolutely riveting. Boy, there's so many. I hope some of your guests will jump over there and search them out, because there's everything from detectives that have helped solve cases to there's one. Let me tell you really quickly about this one that really kind of put the MVAC on the map. Fairly famous case, Crystal Beslanowicz. She was a young girl. 1995. They found her body up about 45 miles away from Salt Lake, where she lived, and she'd been murdered, bludgeoned to death with some river rocks. And the reason that case was so impactful to me was multiple folds here. Number one is 18 years after the case, after the murder happened, they were able to use the MVAC on the granite river rocks that were used to kill her, and they got the suspect's touch DNA off of that. So that was one of the first major cases that the MVAC was used on, that successfully identified the perpetrator. So that's one part of it, and another part obviously is just being able to help solve a case of a 17-year-old girl that's brutally murdered and taken out of life. It's almost the level of that Irina Slavinska that was murdered. But the amazing thing, I mean, that one being on video, geez, that's just crazy.
It's haunting.
But it's kind of that level of, you think about that poor girl that was in the middle of the night. She's running in the mountains of Utah in December, so it's super cold. She was only wearing a pair of socks, running down a service road next to it. She ran about 300 meters naked, basically, because whatever scared her, obviously this guy that eventually caught up to her and murdered her, whatever he did to her back in the parking lot where they suspect they were parked, imagine the terror that poor girl went through. And then she finally sits down on a rock because she cut her foot. And so sat down on a rock, took her socks off, and then that's where he caught up with her and killed her. And so, being able to finally bring some semblance of justice and closure for that poor girl, that was huge. But to me, another major part of that, and we don't talk about it very often. Everybody kind of gets enamored with how the case was solved and the victim and everything. But another really cool part of that case is the responding officer was a sheriff's deputy named Todd Bonner. And he'd been with the Wasatch County Sheriff's Department about 3 years. So pretty young officer. He'd never had a murder. And this was a bad one. I mean, you think about getting hit in the head with a granite rock, about a 10-pound granite rock. So big enough that you could grip it with one hand, but big enough that it would cause a lot of damage, and these sharp edges and everything. And so the ferocity that this girl was murdered was really brutal. And at the very end, after he'd taken two particular rocks and just mangled her head, he'd taken about a 40-pound rock and dropped it on her. On her head, and that's the way they found her. So, you visualize that, and you just think about just absolutely sick. So you have that, but then you have this officer that responds to this. Oh, by the way, a little side note: a farmer and his son that were headed out to go feed the cows early that next morning are the ones that found her. So imagine the trauma that family experienced too. So this responding officer, Todd Bonner, not only was one of the major detectives on this case, but also 18 years later he was still with the Wasatch County Sheriff's Department. He had worked his way up the ranks and eventually was elected as the sheriff. So in 2013, which was about 18 years after the murder happened, and once they used the MVAC on it, they developed that DNA profile, and they found the culprit was actually living in Florida. He was able to fly out to Florida and put the cuffs on this guy. And so, there is some good that came from that, and that is Todd Bonner, the sheriff. Todd Bonner was able to actually end his career. He retired shortly after that, but that was the one case he wanted solved before he retired, and actually prolonged his retirement in order to hopefully solve that case a little, prolonged it a little bit longer and kind of held on as the sheriff until he could finally solve that case. And like I said, he was able.
Family still around, like the victim's family and stuff. Had they passed on, or were they?
No, they were still around.
Thank God.
They lived up in Washington State. But yeah, and so they were able to get some closure from that too. But I wish I could have got them on, but they didn't have any interest in talking to any press or podcasts or anything like that, which is totally understandable. I mean, losing their daughter was traumatic enough. The last thing they want to do is relive it. So
yeah,
pretty cool story.
Great, and again, good ending anyway. Like, poor victim, but like, at least to get justice, that animal taken off the streets, the cuffs put on him. Probably thought he got away scot-free as well. And they're the ones, gone on living his life. So I'd say when that knock on the door, probably wasn't expecting it, which is just even sweeter, really. But Chard, look, fascinating episode. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for teaching us about the MVAC. I know this has been just a really interesting podcast. I know a lot of the listeners will love hearing about kind of the actual technicality around the equipment. We talk so much about cases, but actually the technology is kind of doesn't get mentioned as much. Like, we know DNA, but to go into what the MVAC is. But thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. So, if anybody has interest, they want to go check it out. We have a YouTube channel for MVAC, as well as our website is m-vac.com. And then, like I said, my podcast is All Things Crime. And, we talk about cases like that all the time. So, absolute absolute honor and privilege, Gary. I appreciate you having me on.
100%. I will put the links down, and I definitely am recommended All Things Crime podcast. There's such a wide variety. There's loads of episodes as well, so you'll get stuck in. But I'll link that and the MVAC below, because I think people will definitely be interested to see probably more on the MVAC, kind of get a visual of it. But Jared, look, absolute pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Oh, the pleasure's mine. I appreciate it, Gary.
Cheers. Thanks a mil.
Yes, sir.